Michael Malice here. Welcome to another exciting episode. This is one I've had a long time coming. We've had with us Marion Smith, Executive Director of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. And this is obviously an issue very near and dear to my heart. I was born in the Soviet Union. The core of my work is vis-a-vis North Korea, which you mentioned on the site as one of the, I believe, 5 countries that are still under communist domination, along with Laos, Vietnam, Cuba, and China. Right. How did you get involved with this issue?
Well, I never have a great answer to that question. I think it really comes out of the fact that I was focused on U.S. foreign policy history and the just reality that the whole concept of American leadership and the entire concept of a free world really came out of the global contest between civilization and barbarism, which was the free world and the international conspiracy of communism. Some 40 countries since 1917 and the Bolshevik Revolution, who were all inspired, funded, or imposed upon unwilling populations by the Soviet Union or their allies.
And this is the thing, how the Soviet Union operated, which it's kind of regarded as dismissed or kitschy in political discourse nowadays. This is largely by design and a leftover from those days. They were meant to subvert and secretly do what they needed to do in order to flip these countries into communist rule. Lenin and Stalin both talked about this. Like, you have your agents and they have to play dumb and they have to be for democracy. And then when the time is right, they have to seize power and seize it with absolute brutality.
Yeah, yesterday was actually the anniversary of the 1956 Hungarian Revolution.
Right, 6 days.
Right, which was a great, wake-up call to the West and the entire world when the Soviet Union revealed their true colors and imposed by tanks and military force their rule, the communist puppet government. And after that, it was just no longer possible in the West for intellectual or political allies of the Soviet Union to say that they were about democracy or self-determination. It was the world's newest form of imperialism.
Yeah, they always talk, North Korea, the DPRK is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, democracy, democracy, democracy. And what they mean by democracy is the opposite of human rights, meaning everything is up for discussion, up for a vote. However, the only people who have a vote are the government, and it's one-party rule.
Absolutely.
So it becomes an absolute totalitarianism, where one of my favorite quotes, and she's a divisive figure, but that's fine, not in this context. Ayn Rand was born in Russia, fled what became the Soviet Union, and she was testifying in front of Congress with the Human Un-American Activities Committee, and they were saying to her, and I've brought up this quote many times because I think it's so telling. They're like, don't they like visit their in-laws and have picnics, in the Soviet Union? And she goes, look, it's impossible for free people to understand what it's like to live in a country where human life means nothing, less than nothing, and you know it. And you're living in terror from morning till night, and at night you're waiting for the doorbell to ring. And she goes, yeah, they're trying to live a normal life, but you have to understand it's absolutely impossible to live in these kind of abnormal situations. And I think one of the things that drives me crazy about the right wing in this country is that we are taught about the atrocities of the Holocaust. We're taught about the nightmares of Jim Crow and slavery. But communism is this kind of, it's almost like this rivalry with like America and UK, and how depraved it is not really taught. Can you talk a little bit about just what communism means?
Sure. Well, in
practice.
Yeah, it goes back to Marx and Engels, who really became the definition of socialism. So socialism, of course, predated Marx and Engels, but they became the sort of winners of the intellectual conversation. And both Marx and Engels, of course, represented a denial of the concept of individual rights, a complete embrace of the collective over the individual, the rejection of transcendent truth, to which both man and government is subject. And so really they justified might is right philosophy. And in practice, of course, it fell to Lenin as the first practitioner of Marxist ideals to make Marxism, Leninism a reality. And, since 1917, some 40 nations have been ruled by a communist party. a government set up with those ends in mind. Of course, Lenin realized very quickly that the socialist utopia represented by Marx as the end goal of communism was so far from reality, and that human nature was so absolutely incompatible with the way Marx understood government and the economy and human nature, that they had to reject the idea that we were going to be living in a communist state anytime soon. And so socialism was the path to the eventual goal of communism. Lenin stated that the end goal of socialism is communism. And Marx and Engels, for their part, didn't make any huge distinction between the concept of socialism or communism. I think in common parlance today, those you mentioned living in the free world who don't have an understanding of what it's like to live in a communist state, I think, at least in the English-speaking world, there's emerged this belief that communism somehow is the bucket in which we can put all of the atrocities that actually took place historically. And in the bucket called socialism, we'll put all the hopes and dreams and the nice-sounding philosophy. And I think that's particularly dangerous today for millennials. I'm an elder millennial, but millennials and those younger than us, just don't have an educational base of 20th century history, a framework for understanding what's happening in North Korea today or China, etc. So, out of the 40 countries that Lenin helped, and the Soviet Union and Stalin and imperialism and the various, different interpretations or applications, agrarian communism in Cambodia and on, they all shared some pretty similar characteristics. And certainly every single one of them turned into a totalitarian police state or collapsed economically. And in every case, every single regime ended up killing a significant portion of their population in peacetime as a matter of policy.
Right. So that's the thing people don't understand. A lot of times people think, well, all these people were killed vis-a-vis communism because as part of the struggle to impose communism. Whereas in fact, no. They're killed after the communists come into power because you are the enemy. And in America, we have, and in the West, there's this tradition of innocent to proven guilty, right? That's a legal concept. You're not literally innocent, but it's like we're going to treat you as innocent legally until we can demonstrate that you've committed a crime. With communism, it's the opposite. If you are suspect or your family's suspect in any way, we're not taking those chances. You are possibly a threat and have to be exterminated. And the most extreme example of this, I think, is Cambodia, which you mentioned, which is what percent of the population was killed?
25%.
In
a short period of time.
Yeah, it was like 5 years?
Yeah, it was a very short period of time.
1 in 4 people were murdered. And here was their criterion. This is Pol Pot's criterion. If you didn't have calluses on your hands, if you wore glasses, because that's a mark of an intellectual, if you went to college, he destroyed agrarian communism, you mentioned. His idea was we should all live in the countryside. So the cities were decimated. And this sounds like something even a comic book supervillain wouldn't think of. And it happened, and it happened here, and people don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit more about Pol Pot and that whole story? I'm sure that's something you cover a lot with your work.
Well, I'm not an expert on Cambodian history. You are an expert on North Korean modern history, so I think we should get into that a little bit too. I'm fascinated to know what drew your attention to North Korea, especially everything that's going on now. But of course, the entire story in Southeast Asia was the unfolding of the reality that after World War II, we no longer had Nazi Germany as a threat, but we did have the Soviet Union as a threat. And as Mao's China took their own course in geopolitics, they also wanted their empire, the way the Soviet Union had in Central and Eastern Europe. And so we fought a Korean War, we fought a Vietnam War, we had U.S. service members who fought and died in Cambodia, and Laos and other spots throughout the Cold War. And that was, the might of the United States, defending the free world. And there were mistakes made, of course, and U.S. foreign policy is not perfect in that region. But certainly, I think the 50 million South Koreans who live free would prefer that life as opposed to the 25 million North Koreans who live as slaves. And the literal line that is defended that demarks that difference is manned by U.S. Soldiers still. So that is I think something that we are being reminded of today, not only with North Korea but especially the People's Republic of China. I think it's surprised many of us who thought the communist parties of this century were going to go away from the ideological justifications of Marxism. But what we see, of course, with Xi Jinping in China is a doubling down on the Marxism. Because still you do need, as you mentioned, a way to accuse people of things. So if you've rejected religion and morality, you still have to have a sort of code of conduct, an ethic, if you will, by which you can enforce discipline in the party. And certainly Xi Jinping has used that in his anti-corruption campaigns and within the court politics of the party to get rid of opponents, to centralize power. And we've seen, of course, 2014, the imposition of Marxist interpretation of history in the high schools of Hong Kong. And that was the reason the high school students of Hong Kong took to the streets and occupied the main squares of Hong Kong in opposition to that. So here you had high school students and college students who had lived free their whole life up until then. Their parents had lived free, and their grandparents had lived free under British protection. And now, for the first time in 2014, we saw the imposition of not only the corruption and the clamping down on free speech, but this Marxist, interpretation of history and the ideology of Maoism. And we have new statues of Xi Jinping and Mao being erected, as we have statues of Lenin being erected in Russia. So, people are always telling me, are asking, is China a communist state today? Well, it is, in as much as the Soviet Union ever was a communist state. So we have to call them something, and that is what they call themselves. And their justification of power and their claim to rule over the lives of, almost 20% of the world's population is the claim that Marxism and Maoism is a better path forward for the Chinese people, and certainly much more efficient and better able to deliver in the modern world than the messy institutions of democracy. That's the case that they make. And it was interesting, this year was the 200th anniversary of Marx's birth, so the bicentennial. And
which was celebrated by the New York Times. We'll get into that in a
celebrated by many different people and in various places. One snapshot that points to a lot of the misinformation propaganda and the need for, I think, intellectual and moral courage in the West to continually reject these ideas, because I think the ideas of socialism represent one of, if not the greatest threat to the ideas of a free society today. And certainly, in a practical matter, communist parties in power represent one of the greatest material threats to our way of life. But China donated a giant statue of Marx, donated it to the city of Trier, Germany, his birthplace, and the head Juncker of the EU went and took part in that celebration. That is just one snapshot of our whitewashing of the crimes of communism, and unfortunately having a double standard when it comes to understanding the crimes of Nazism and the Holocaust, memorializing those victims, and understanding that if we don't know that history and a new generation comes into positions of influence, if they don't know that history, we're more likely to have things like anti-Semitism and violence against Jews or other ethnic minorities. But the same is true for the flawed ideas, the flawed economic and moral ideas of Marxism. And, 20% of the world's population today still lives in a single-party communist state. and the human rights atrocities that they subject their citizens to is still on par with some of the worst atrocities that occurred in the 20th century. The forced organ harvesting in China, the slave labor camps in North Korea, the assassination of political opponents in Cuba, and now the coup, which is what arguably could be considered in Venezuela the world's sixth Marxist single-party regime now.
And I think the thing that people need to understand is a book called Everyday Stalinism, which I read a very long time ago. And the point that people need to understand, I think, is besides the genocide, which I think it's very hard to wrap your head around. It's very hard to wrap your head around the idea that America's, 350 million people, that a quarter of the population will die in 5 years. Even if it's a natural disaster, we can't imagine that. No. What you can imagine is knowing that every time you call someone on the phone, someone's listening in. Every time you write a letter, someone is reading it. When you're in school, your teacher and your other students are watching you and reporting on you, that your friends are being paid and incentivized to turn you in, that if you get in trouble, you can't blog about it, tweet, call someone. No. You have to basically give in because they can make it worse for your family because they don't have rights either. The pervasiveness, and if you complain, you are basically like being Antifa, right? Like you're like a troublemaker. The pervasiveness of the control and the oppression and the layers is something that I think people can somewhat understand. And that's a whole other level of depravity that isn't talked about enough. We focus on the extremes, understandably, because they are so beyond the pale and horrifying. But even the maudlin is insane and horrifying. And you're taught, I remember my mom, I talked to her about whether she bought all this crap that they taught her in school. And she'd be like, one year, this guy's great hero, communist hero, here of the Soviet Union. The next year, he's always been a traitor.
Right.
And you have to sit there and smile and nod. And you have to take your test at school and write your essays. And when you're taught things that at least one of those is false. They can't both be true. And knowing that your entire reality is a lie. But at the same time, if everything's a lie, you don't know a lie in what direction. If you say this person's 6 foot, that's a lie. Is he 7 foot or is he 5 foot? Or is he a woman? You have no idea. And I remember an acquaintance of mine was talking about how when she went to the West for the first time, she went to the supermarket and started crying because she's like, they told us how poor they were in the West. So you might be cynical. Even if you're cynical, you think, okay, 85% of what they say is a lie, but there's got to be some grain of truth. But you have no way of knowing there's no mechanism for determining truth in this context. And that is also psychologically very disturbing. If you are living in a culture where everything's a lie, it's very hard to have any kind of semblance of a sane life.
Absolutely. The psychological scars that, were endured by generations over decades in Central Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, it's still at least one of the most defining aspects of the political culture and the society as a whole today. And, in Ukraine, Belarus, Russian Federation, of course, this is obvious. But it's still very much a part of the politics and the national conversations and the issues of memory and justice throughout Central and Eastern Europe, which is why you find a lot of museums and memorials and things of that nature. There still is a lot about the realities of maintaining the machines of the surveillance state in these regimes that we don't necessarily know. There's a lot, just in terms of the scholarship as a whole in those 40 countries who have experienced communist rule. There's just a lot of scholarship that we haven't done. And in China, it's impossible to do now, even though it was for a while in the 90s and in the early 2000s. In Russia, they're destroying some of the Gulag archives, for example, and suppressing the work of like the Memorial Society there in their efforts to establish a record of victims and memorialize them. But it is significant that no communist state was effectively overthrown by a revolution or a people's movement to take power back violently. And that really is because of the surveillance system that was able to identify your problem people and to eliminate them. Stalin said, death solves all problems. No man, no problem. So when even a high-ranking government official opposes a policy because it's not working, well, you don't fix the policy. You just get rid of the man who's pointing out that you aren't doing the right thing. And so that played out over and over again. In all of the communist countries. It's still playing out today. What I think is a new challenge for us in the United States in particular is when the technology, the communications technology and the tech companies collude with regimes like China to surveil and to censor their speech. Project Dragonfly at Google is the most recent example, but there was a court case in which Yahoo was sued and had to make a payment to the family of a dissident who had a U.S.-based Yahoo account, and when the Chinese government asked for his records, Yahoo gave it to them, and they used that to prosecute him as a political prisoner and to imprison him. So the fact that far from U.S. brands right now, our top brands being tech companies mostly, far from top U.S. brands representing American freedom and the values of self-determination and being who you want to be, like Coca-Cola did or Levi Jeans did during the Soviet Union. I mean, of the anti-denim law that the Soviet Union passed because that symbolism was so powerful and a way to criticize the regime without doing it directly. But the fact that our main U.S. brands right now would actively be working with the largest and most powerful totalitarian state to create a censorship state, a more total totalitarianism than anything George Orwell could have dreamed of, points to a massive problem.
A lot of you are going to be traveling. Let me tell you about autoslash.com. It's the #1 site for getting a deal on a car rental. You get the best coupons and discount codes for the lowest rate possible, and you can track prices on your rental right until the day you pick up the car. That's how Autoslash works. Renters save on average 30% off, and here's how they work. They search all the major rental companies like Avis, Hertz, and Thrifty for the best deals. They search for coupons. They search for discount codes for all the major rental companies to get the lowest rate. Then they apply discounts based on your membership affiliations like AAA, Costco, to get you every coupon you're eligible for. Then they track your rental once you've booked it. If the rate drops, they alert you so you can rebook it and save. And here's what: it's free. Free. Tell Autoslash when you're renting, and they're going to search the universe for coupons and best rates. It takes all the hassle out of finding a rental. I know a lot of the comedians at Gas have been using this to get to gigs and have said great things about it. Just go to autoslash.com. It's the best tools for finding great deals on car rentals, and we don't have a promo code because this is free. These types of systems draw a certain type of psychological personality type. It's not easy to be a butcher for a normal person. It's not, people who are implement the death penalty. It messes them up profoundly. So what you get in these regimes, the people at the top who have to implement death on the order of millions, they are very clearly sociopaths. The best example of this that I know off the top of my head is Beria, who was Stalin's right-hand man, torturer. He would just rape women brazenly. He would take them to his dacha, and this is on well researched and record, and he would rape them because they have no rights whatsoever. And he would say, "Oh, your husband and your dad are in the gulag, but if you sleep with me, they'll be freed," knowing that they were dead already. And then he would offer them a bouquet of flowers. And if they took the bouquet, that would mean it was retroactively consensual. And when they refused, he'd say, "Well, that's going to be your funeral wreath." And the women were killed. And they're still finding bodies. The dacha is now some kind of embassy or something in Moscow around there. And Stalin knew because his daughter was at Beria's house, and Stalin's on the phone with her. I think it was his daughter. And he says, "Get out of there immediately." So what happens is when we talk about corruption, I think you and I would be happy if you had some kind of sleazy mayor and he's skimming money off the side. You know, it's a waste of money. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about corruption. It's someone who takes personal pleasure in murdering and torturing, literally torturing people who have crossed him, and who there's no recourse whatsoever. You can't talk to the press because now you're an enemy of the state. You can't talk to the police because they report to him. You can't talk to the government. You can't leave the country. So there's absolutely no recourse for you. And that, you know, we have so many recourses in a free country where if something is wrong, things happen all the time. We find out about it, you know, but there's none, and you know it. And that's what I think is another layer of how horrible these things are. Venezuela, for example, when Chavez came to power, there were protests against him, and now you're anti-government, you're a troublemaker. His goons just took their guns and were firing into the crowd. That's what not recognizing free speech means. It doesn't mean, oh, you're kicked off of Facebook. No. It means you are shot, and that is the right thing to do from their perspective. It's not like, sorry, we had to shoot you. It's like, no, we're glad we had to shoot you. You're the enemy.
Right. I mean, the fact is that the first intellectual case that was made for political genocide was made by Marx and Engels in their journal, because they were explaining, you know, the various, phases in the march to progress, and that some people groups by their ethnicity were either too agrarian or just too far behind, and that they would have to perish in a revolutionary holocaust. And that's the words that they used. I think at that time they mentioned the Slavs and the Scots. But of course, almost every communist regime used both a sense of nationalism or racism or factionalism combined with Marxism, again, because it unleashed might is right, and there is no authority higher than the state, and of course the party controls the state. And so the real politics and the real things that happened in a dynamic way happened at the top of the party, to see who would actually be able to take the reins of the total power that was represented by the top post of the party.
Yeah. I mean, where would you say are the big trouble spots today besides Venezuela? Is that the big one for you?
Well, I mean, you have Crimea and Eastern Ukraine, which is still a war zone. And, the Crimean Tatars in particular, who were deported by the hundreds of thousands when the Soviets first invaded, and moved them out for geopolitical reasons. And of course, there were many different forced deportations that the Soviets did during that time. We gave the Truman-Reagan Medal of Freedom of Victims of Communism to Mustafa Zhumalev in 2014. And he was unable to come to the ceremony because his wife was stuck in Crimea, and he was not allowed back in. And over the course of our conversation, his secretary was attacked and hospitalized. So there was, political violence directed against the Crimean Tatars. And the puppet governments, of course, in eastern Ukraine use Soviet imagery. And, the Ukrainians, for their part, especially in western Ukraine, tore down, I think it was actually hundreds of still existing in 2014, Lenin statues and other Soviet symbolism. So I think, that entire conflict is unthinkable without understanding the unresolved legacy of communism. And that's true for the entire region. I mean, the human networks that are still utilized by Moscow today were established. Those connections were made during the Cold War. The entire infrastructure of the pipelines, right, running from east to west, but not vertically, was a way to keep the subject or captive nations of Central and Eastern Europe under the thumb of Moscow. And the politics, energy politics in the region today are still, hamstrung by that historical reality. But elsewhere, I mean, you have the same thing that began happening in Venezuela 2 years ago, where you mentioned the ratcheting up of political violence and Maduro going ahead and enacting, completing the coup a year ago. The same thing is happening in Nicaragua right now. So these are countries in which, over the last 20 years, Cuba, the Communist Party of Cuba and the Castros, has played a much more important role in influencing the direction of those countries than the United States has. And of course, we have a mixed history of U.S. foreign policy in Latin America,
of course,
for sure. But is that really the direction that we are going to allow Latin America to go? Would it not be better to support those 7 million, I think, Venezuelans who partook in an unofficial election to register their protest of Maduro? Could we just have demanded that Cuba remove the Cuban military and intelligence agents who were installed in Caracas, and Maduro's bodyguard are Cuban? Could we not just demand that the process of Cuban imperialism cease? Oh, of course we could, and that would have a very good impact. And then, of course, what is happening in East Asia and the increasingly belligerent actions of China. So, on a geopolitical level, you have the building and militarizing of islands and contested waters of the South China Sea. You have, of course, the rejection of the one country, two systems policy in Hong Kong, where bookshop owners and journalists and businessmen are disappeared or imprisoned for political reasons. You have now the National Democratic Party in Hong Kong that's been kicked out of the assembly and banned. And then you have the global effort by China to isolate Taiwan because, of course, they do not recognize that Taiwan is an independent country.
I had Freddie Lim as a guest here. You might be familiar with him,
right.
The activist, a few weeks ago, and it was just fascinating the machinations that the Chinese government is using against Taiwan, including using airport codes to make sure it's not registered as its own country. You have to say it's part of China, and they drop down little things like that. When these governments work, they cover all their bases.
For sure.
And you mentioned something else about disappearing. It's that here, if someone's on trial, it's a spectacle. The court records might be sealed, but there's a huge presumption that it won't be sealed. It's public. There, people vanish, and you'll never know what happened to them. And you're not going to be asking questions. And they can play dumb, and who are you to challenge them? So it's...
Including most recently the Chinese head of Interpol.
Yeah.
Who for about a week, his whereabouts were unknown when he went back to visit China. And then, of course, he's now resigned from Interpol. But I don't think a Chinese communist puppet should be heading Interpol anyway.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But it's just also interesting because I've talked to people in North Korea, and they'll say things like, well, why don't we just kill Kim Jong-un? It's like, it's not like there's a White House. It's not like you have information like, and Congress goes to, the congressional building, and we got the Senate offices and the House offices, and you have the White House where the president lives. You don't have information. You don't have access to, there's no Wikipedia. There is, but it's written by the government. So I think it's so hard for people in the West to understand what it's like to live in a country where information isn't free. Let's talk about artists. If you are an artist, art is subtle. It's nuanced. But if it's nuanced, that means half the time you're going to be saying something that whoever in power doesn't like. It's up to their interpretation. And right away, how are you supposed to produce a painting? How are you supposed to produce literature? How are you supposed to produce music? Well, if you can't do that, you're producing just pedantic crap that validates the government. Well, then people don't have leisure. And that's the other thing. Like these communist countries, your spare time is supposed to be spent working for the people, your organizational life or political life.
Right.
So you're accounted for morning till night. They take care of your day. So if you think working 9 to 5 is tough, I mean, we don't know what it's like where you have to work a day job and then so-called volunteer once your day is done, and then you have to worry about getting food.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a form of slavery where you have a state and the subjects of that state are viewed simply as resources.
Yes, you're a resource, right? A means to an end.
Right.
Tell me more about your organization, what work it does.
Sure. So Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation was established by an authorizing act of Congress in 1993 to memorialize the victims of communist regimes throughout the world and to educate Americans about that history and the ideology and the legacy of communism. In 2007, President George W. Bush dedicated the statue near Capitol Hill, the Victims of Communism Memorial, which is a bronze replica of the Goddess of Democracy statue that the student protesters in Beijing in '89 built as a form of protest before the massacre, of course, took place in June of '89. And the memorial.
Let me say one more thing.
Sure.
I'm not a fan of Antifa. I think they're very dangerous. I want people to imagine what it would be like if everyone who was Antifa was just shot. And just, then there were no news reports about it ever again. Just think about what it would be like living in a country like that. And you can't wrap your head around it. Go ahead, sorry.
Absolutely. I mean, the institutional.
Not just Antifa, anyone in the Women's March.
Political violence.
Yeah, imagine everyone in the Women's March was shot. Like, just imagine what that would be like. First of all, you wouldn't have the march to begin with, right? Because they know they're going to get shot. But you see all these protests all the time. Tea Party, the Trump rallies, you see the Pussycat March. None of that's allowed. And you might be literally killed for taking part in something like this.
Well, those students and white-collar workers, mostly young, who were killed by the PLA army in Tiananmen Square and elsewhere throughout China as those protests were put down, many of them didn't even expect that the People's Liberation Army would be sent in by the Communist Party to crush the people. And in fact, they had to take divisions from outside of Beijing and bring them in, because within the PLA there was not an eagerness to crush the protests.
And that's a very unfortunate choice of words, because they were literally run over with tanks.
All right. So
I did an interview once with an NPR affiliate, and I have it now down to like 15 seconds before people are laughing about Kim Jong-il and being suicidal. She goes, "Oh, Kim Jong-il is a very campy figure." I go, "Well, that's an unfortunate choice of words." And does it drive you crazy? When Sid Vicious from the Sex Pistols in the late 70s was wearing a swastika T-shirt around New York, that was clearly him giving the finger to people. He knew this was a symbol of hatred and defiance, and it was not. It was very clear. People wear the hammer and sickle blithely, and they think it's just like a Coke logo.
Sure. And
they have no concept of what. And frankly, part of me is glad that they can be so oblivious, that they can be so free, that they don't imagine the alternative. How does that make you feel when you see that kind of iconography?
Yeah, I don't like it. It lets me know that person either doesn't know the history, or they are in some sense whitewashing that history and willing to ignore the victims and continue on this ideological path that it's going to be the 41st time, and that's when socialism, Marxism is going to work. But I personally,
I'll give you a line to use. A friend of mine gave it to me online. I forget who. And when they say real communism has never been tried, so just tell them real Nazism has never been tried, and just see their reaction to that. Because I mean, my other buddy, I quote this in my forthcoming book, said, "Which murderous ideology should I be worried about? The one that lost or the one that won?"
Right.
So go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say that I personally am not for banning symbols.
Of course.
You did see in a number of countries in Central Eastern Europe who banned either the Red Star or the Hammer and Sickle. Some of them banned communist parties. I can understand the case for banning a communist party because it's a subversive force that's trying to overthrow the state and has a history of that within that country.
Right.
That I could understand. But I think banning symbols doesn't make the people who believe in those ideologies or want to embrace that past and make it part of the future. It doesn't get rid of them. They just go underground, and it makes it more difficult to combine their rhetoric or words about future policy or the direction of the country with the record that we now have with especially communism and socialism and Nazism and fascism.
And you see this with the Golden Dawn in Greece, where like, it's not a swastika, but I mean, you know what I mean? It's close enough. I mean, if you don't have the hammer and sickle, it'll just be a sickle and hammer.
Right.
It's very easy to have slightly altered iconography, and that'll still get the purpose across. But I interrupted you earlier about your organizations. You were talking about the statue.
Right. So the statue serves as a place where, we have a annual commemorative event called the Roll Call of Nations, where dozens of ethnic human rights groups and embassies will come and lay a wreath on behalf of their fellow countrymen from each of the 40 nations that experience communist rule. And just recently we had Feng Zing, who was a Tiananmen Square protester who pushed a young girl out of the way of one of those tanks that was coming in. And it ran over his legs, so he lost both of his legs. But he was there to receive one of our human rights awards, and it's a poignant thing to see survivors of Tiananmen Square standing at the base of a bronze replica of that statue, lighting candles and having moments of silence for the Chinese dissidents and political prisoners today who are still suffering under that system. Of course, it's illegal to talk about Tiananmen Square in China. You will go to prison, or you will have your internet cut off, or you will be intimidated by state security if you engage in any sort of historical conversation about it. As simple as survivors or historians gathering in a living room on June 3rd or June 4th each year is prohibited, and there are arrests made about that. When we organized a teleconference on June 4th 2 years ago, we had a massive cyber attack against our foundation, that was investigated by the FBI. It was a China origin attack, and that was just the first of many that we've endured.
And wait, can I just ask? That's one of the things that they're trying to do. It's like, all the bad stuff was Mao, and Mao's long gone, and now we're the good guys. Like, we've turned our back on it. You go to Zara in Beijing, and it's like, no, you guys have concentration camps now.
Yeah, absolutely, including new ones in Xinjiang province with Turkic and Uyghurs, who are many of them Muslim, but they're also Christians and other groups in the region. And 1 million out of 10 million in that province are reportedly in those camps. There's just been a couple of congressional hearings trying to investigate what actually is happening, and of course they deny that it's occurring.
You know what the North Koreans say about the concentration camps, right?
What's that?
We don't use that term, so we don't have any.
Right. If China's calling them re-education camps right now. Yeah. But anyhow, I mean, these are the challenges that we have to confront today. The direction in terms of free world versus territory on the globe controlled by a communist party is not moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
And so I don't want the decades of Cold War reality becoming part of our reality this century. But the fact that national security strategy was recently, the U.S. national security strategy for the first time listed China as one of our top threats. That never before has happened. And on the intelligence side, espionage, military affairs, diplomatically, it's very clear we are headed into a sort of Cold War standing with the People's Republic of China.
Tell me more about what actual events your organization puts forward to kind of further this stuff.
So we host high school teacher seminars in Washington and around the country. We have a high school curriculum supplement that we make available to them so that they can teach some of this difficult history and in the classroom. We have an oral history project called Witness, where we interview those who have survived living under a communist regime and have stories to tell. And we try to make that available at film screenings and on college campuses and online. There are a lot of videos out there that do tell the stories of victims of communism. But unfortunately, no one watches them. So with our Witness project, we are trying to package them in a way that they will actually, be watched online and help to educate, through what I think is the most compelling way, personal testimony and stories, but help to educate a generation who apparently believes that democratic socialism or socialism is different than the historical record that we've seen play out since 1917. And, it is, of course, terrible to have on American streets Nazi and hammer and sickle flags flying. And, of course, it's dangerous, too, just in terms of the political discourse in our country, to fall for the idea that somehow a really conservative person is a Nazi on the extreme end, and a really liberal person is somehow a communist. Intellectually and historically, the two are intertwined and are on the same end of the spectrum politically.
One of the things that drove me crazy was I remember vividly when Governor Huckabee from Arkansas, when Mike Bloomberg had a ban on selling large things of soda here in New York City, and he said, "Oh, this is like North Korea." I'm like, "You are." I mean, it takes a lot from get me offended and triggered, and I'm like, I mean, yeah. I assure you, there's no soda in North Korea. The size of the container is not the issue, and the blitheness that people use these as knee-jerk references, both Trump or to other things. It's like this is so far removed from what you're talking about that you don't know what you're talking about, and it like I was saying earlier with Rand, it's like you have no concept of what it, and it's very hard to explain to someone. Even I don't really know it because I grew up here, even though I was raised by people from, the Soviet Union, to be in that environment, like having gone to North Korea, you can't explain what it's like when every aspect of your environment is inimical to human life. Mm-hmm. It's impossible to describe. The closest analog is if you're very, very drunk, there's no aspect of what you're doing that's not going to be a function of being drunk, right? But you're going to wake up and be sober and hungover. You don't get to wake up. This is your entire life. And instead of being drunk and being in good mood, it's oppression and evil and someone watching what you're doing and looking for an excuse to harm you. And knowing, again, that there's no recourse. You can't escape.
It's a nightmare. It's hell on earth. I mean, the gulags and the killing fields of Cambodia, the purges. I mean, the psychological side of it, the German film, The Lives of Others, gets to the point you made earlier about it's also not just the more gruesome aspects, but the idea that you are unfree even in your mind, and that you have to police your own thoughts to live safely or not have your family members harmed. That is it's a terrible system, and the reason it is imposed in every communist state is because they don't have a moral claim that justifies their rules. So it really is a culture of fear that allows them to remain in power, and
by design.
By design,
it's not like the fear is like, how sometimes people will say we need police brutality because otherwise you're going to get a riot. Okay, you can wrap your head in that argument. No. They want the fear. The whole point is to live in fear because then you're going to be obedient.
Right. Reggie Littlejohn, who's an expert on the one-child, or now two-child, it's sometimes called, but it's really the forced family planning policy of China. Her point is that they'll never get rid of it because it's one of the most invasive policies that they have to instill this culture of fear from the authorities, where forced abortions take place on mothers who want their child. And there are, of course, cases where it is used by either local authorities or a political rival. If a forced planning unit comes into your house and conducts a forced abortion, maybe because there was a paperwork error or something, well, you're never the same again. And that level of invasive violence.
Let me pause this here, because abortion is obviously a very intense issue in America, and you have the pro-choice side saying, well, Kavanaugh is going to be Supreme Court, we're going to have back alley abortions. The pro-life people think, okay, this is murder. We're used to that. No one can even think of what it's like to have abortion police
come
into your house and forcing you to have an abortion if you want to have that kid.
Right.
It's unimaginable here.
That's right.
And that's the reality right now.
That's right. That's right. And the Chinese government itself claims that more than 400 million births have been prevented as a result of their family planning policy. And it's, of course, used in a more cultural or even actual genocidal way in Tibet and against the Uyghurs and elsewhere against religious minorities. And then, the system of forced organ harvesting against political and religious prisoners in China is something that we're just really beginning to learn about. But they will take a prisoner of conscience and select them because they meet a medical patient who needs an organ. And they will sometimes take the organ while the patient is alive. Doctors are now complicit in this activity. That is Nazi-level stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And that is the country that some people in Silicon Valley think is the future. And so we have a real disconnect, and those who've been, paying attention, even on the economic side, have been divesting a lot of their mainland Chinese investments for some time, because we know that the Chinese government lies. And that includes on economic data. So, the artificial construction bubble that was taking place because of quotas, right? The Soviet Union had grain quotas.
Yeah.
The Chinese government today has construction quotas and other forms of trying to replicate market forces to show economic growth. And of course, that is falling apart now.
I love doing ad reads for Heshi socks because I wear these socks every day. Promo code welcome30 and the website is HESHIsocks.com. Here is why they're great. They're cheap, but they're quality. Pillows for your feet. They're super soft. They have an antimicrobial. I don't even know how they did it, but you wear them every day and your feet don't smell. They're super soft. You can wear them with dress shoes. You can wear them with sneakers. They've got a new fall line. They've got ankle socks. Super comfortable. Regular dress socks are often expensive. I don't want to waste money on socks. I want socks that make me feel nice, and that's why I wear Heshi socks all the time. So does everyone else in this office, because they're awesome. If you go to heshisocks.com, HESHIsocks.com, and use promo code welcome30, you get 30% off. What are you waiting for? It's just that abortion thing. I just really want to stick on it for a second, because how hard is it for any of us to imagine? We're not women, obviously, but it's so primal. These aren't like that. Those women want to have those kids, and you're forced against your will to, from your perspective, whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, kill that person who's going to be your daughter or your son. You will never recover for that psychologically.
Right.
And that's, again, what totalitarian means. When you say human rights don't exist, where the individual lives for the state, nothing is sacred, even as something as intensely personal as your womb.
Right.
And again, this isn't by accident. This is by design.
Right. And I think there's just a knowledge gap. If people understood that this was taking place, we would be much more concerned about, more than 100 Confucius institutes run as a tool of propaganda by the Communist Party here in the United States, and by high school level student groups that are controlled and funded by the party. They're able to get, people like the Dalai Lama disinvited from university campuses because of well-coordinated local campaigns to intimidate and shut down free speech, shut down conversations about Tiananmen Square, et cetera, et cetera.
And it's not like the Dalai Lama's Milo.
Right.
It's the Dalai Lama. This is the world, one of the major world religions, and he's the exemplar of it, and he preaches peace and kindness.
Right. So, far from us sort of supporting pro-democracy or human rights folks in China at a level that is meaningful, we are now allowing them through propaganda and other tools of information operations here in the United States to coerce our conversations about China. to threaten, college students who think they may want to learn Mandarin and focus on China as an academic discipline. They're warned that be careful what you say about China, because you can't be a serious, student of China if you can't visit China. And of course, we know they're pooling visas of journalists and other scholars who have written something that is critical of one-party rule in China or of communist history. So we really do have to confront the fact that the totalitarian system of China and those countries that are allied with it, which number one is North Korea, and China doesn't have many allies, but they are doing things like subsuming the entire country, the internet system in Nepal, into the Chinese internet, which is of course totalitarian. So they have an imperial stance, and it is taking that unfree system to places where it didn't before exist, and it already is on American campuses and in the high schools. China spends $10 billion a year on these soft power sort of propaganda efforts, and it is unfortunately pretty successful.
One of the reasons I had these shirts made, sometimes when sometimes you don't want to go to the gym, you don't want to go to a party, you don't want to work, write that day. So there are times I'll take time off, right? A day off, I'll be lazy. And sometimes I'm sick of talking about North Korea. And that's the one time I don't let myself take time off, because why I have this shirt and is everyone I met in North Korea when I was there is still there. Everyone in North Korea right now has to walk around their house when they're outside and have this lapel pin on their chest. Everyone. So when you realize, it's been 6 years since I've been there, and that every kid I saw on the street, every grandma, every surly teenage boy are still there, and think how much your life has changed, or the listeners' lives changed over 6 years. And sure, their lives have changed to a point, but they'll never be allowed to leave. They'll never be allowed to, as if things stand now, have free information or be able to really fully relax. And that messes with your head something fierce. And that's the one issue where I'm like, people are like, oh, I'm sure you're sick of talking about this. I am sometimes, but I can't be. I don't have that right. Because as pompous as this sounds, it's true. There are far too few people talking about these people. And I was on Fox and Friends when those hostages got released and they landed in the States. And they were saying, well, what are you worried about with the upcoming Singapore summit with President Trump and Kim Jong-un? And I said, the continuing enslavement of the North Korean people. And the host immediately like, oh my gosh, yeah. So that is something that I find so crucial, that I don't give a damn about Trump. I don't give a damn about Kim Jong-un. It always has to be that right now, as we're talking, 25 million people are enslaved in North Korea, and they have been since the 40s. And we can't imagine, even I can't imagine what it's like. And the good thing I'll tell you, we touched those things we talked about earlier. I've met a bunch of refugees, and they're totally vapid and boring. And thank God they can be boring American teenagers and have humanity and not be permanently destroyed by this soulless government.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, what piqued your interest originally in North Korea?
Well, I was born in the Soviet Union. I'm Jewish. So those were two chances for my family to have been in a camp.
Sure.
And I saw, you get to a certain age, you're like, I can go and see what my family went through. Well, this is the closest analog I had to Stalinism. And in fact, my friend who grew up in St. Petersburg, I was showing him the photos. He goes, this looks like a Russian city with like Asian people wearing Russian clothes. It totally blew his mind.
And they were designed after the Gulag system.
Yeah. But I mean, even the architecture and the buildings and everything about it, it's just so Soviet. And it kind of makes you feel closer to your family because, again, my parents, by the time they were born, it was after Stalin and so on. But I got out. I got to America when I was 2, and I got to grow up here, and I had all these wonderful opportunities. And it could have been a flip of a coin. And this could have been me back there. And when I wrote my article for Reason Magazine about my week in North Korea, was the title of the article, my guide had the same haircut my mom had in like 1982, because they're behind, with their culture. They're trying to, and it messed with me something fierce, because when you're talking to her, I'm like, this is like, look, it's like sliding doors. In a parallel universe, this is my mom and I'm in North Korea, and I am going to always be hungry and always be cold and always be paranoid, both paranoid of the US imperialists who are going to come to kill me at any moment, supposedly, and also paranoid about my own government and who's going to turn me in, and 3 generations of my family are going to be taken overnight somewhere, and I don't even know where, and I don't want to know. So the fact that this is these people's reality, I just feel this huge, I hate using this word, but duty to have done something about this. What is your personal interest in this subject?
Right. Well, I mean, one of the great privileges of working with VOC are all the dissidents that we get to meet, and the survivors. And, even hearing stories about things that are happening right now in China or Cuba or elsewhere, and have the opportunity to give them a voice and try to let people know what their reality is. Certainly, if I lived in a system like that, I'd love to know that there are people trying to tell my story. But just the heroism, the courage, the humility, the sacrifice, and the lack of cynicism in so many of the personal heroes that I've been able to meet over the last few years. It's inspiring, and it's certainly, as messy and volatile as our politics can be, still makes me very, very thankful and grateful to live in a free country with all of our problems.
As my criterion, if you can get on a plane, you have it pretty good. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. The fact that these populations were completely trapped in these cages. And the question I'll leave you with this question. The question I always wrestle with myself, because you've spoken to more dissidents than I have from different countries. I always ask myself, is it better that they know that they're enslaved, or is it better that they're ignorant? I'm of the mindset that knowledge is always preferable to ignorance. But at the same time, so I see both sides. What do you think?
I think about the Samizdat movement and the underground universities behind the Iron Curtain, who developed Aaron Rhodes, who's a scholar, just has a book out on the debasement of human rights. He makes the point that those individuals in the various countries, totally suppressed, but exercising their God-given mind, were able to conduct, scientific inquiry and have journal articles that were peer-reviewed, all of it illegal, and they developed their own understanding of a sort of human rights doctrine, which was quite sophisticated and helped many of them to take leading roles in what became free, independent countries following 1989. So I think you cannot suppress the human mind and the desire for, creative lives, and it is terrible to see the artistic scene in Cuba that is completely crushed. El Sexto is, I think, probably one of the most famous. But it's inhuman, and it's no way to live, and we should do everything we can. I mean, we have Voice of America, we have the various elements, Radio Marti. I would love to see us have a more vigorous Mandarin, more creative Mandarin service. What we have done during the Cold War, and what we can do again, is connect those populations with their own past, with their own culture, with their own leading figures, intellectually and otherwise. And, they're the best allies we can have. We just got to make sure that across the board we're favoring the people over the party.
If people are further interested in this subject, besides your website, which we have the links on with this episode, I highly recommend reading The Black Book of Communism, which was written by a bunch of lefties, but they are not pulling punches. And it goes through country by country and the atrocities. And the one thing you have to give it to these communist parties are the creativity that they implement to impose control and how to break people. It's something out of a comic book, but unfortunately it's our real life. and it's our Earth, and it happened here, and it's still happening in many places. And if this is something of interest to people, read that book. And then if you want to have the palate cleanser, read what I think might be one of the most beautiful books, which I think is easily one of the most beautiful books I've written, Revolution 1989, which is how one by one the countries were liberated peacefully, and no one could believe it was happening, right? Even the countrymen themselves. And it was just absolutely wonderful to see that kind of springtime in Eastern Europe. Marion Smith, thank you so much, and thank you for your work.
Thanks for having me.
I will see you all next week. You are welcome. Oof.